I want to cover a lot of ground today because next week is the penultimate lecture. Today is the penultimate lecture, and next week is the last lecture. So I want to make sure you have everything at your disposal to properly do your essays and also to get a sense of the full course. Okay, all good? Excellent program. All right. Last week I wasn't sure if it was very clear, and so I wanted to really just hammer home certain things that you really just have to understand. And then do something like, yes, I understand, no, I don't understand, I don't, something like that. Okay. This course is about, it's called Untimely Meditations. It's a phrase that has been stolen from Nietzsche. Friedrich Nietzsche, in his work of the same name, Untimely Meditations, is actually trying to talk about, or is actually articulating, a type of methodology that is called a genealogy, a logic of the genus, G-E-N-U-S, sorry. A logic of that which can categorize. Now, it's untimely because on one level, it falls outside of time, and on another level, it disrupts time, but it doesn't really fall out of time. It can never escape time. So already there's a paradox that's going on. Now, this course is trying to deal with the impact of this age, of the mediated digital age. It's trying to get you to get a sense of how logic has to take on what's called discursive or rhizomatic logic. It's discursive or rhizomatic because its ability to go from one point to another point isn't directly predictable in the same manner that it was predictable under a Newtonian physics. So this is what's key here. And so, for example, in Yasmin's talk today, that's why I was giving you some sort of direction, try and get you to think outside or away from a dialectical frame. Now, to do this in a way that I think is more comprehensible than what I was saying last week, and perhaps what I was saying for many weeks, I'm going to try another way in. Okay, so I'm not sure if you've had a chance to actually read Clouds and Clocks. It's in the PDF, it's in the Dropbox. But the work that should underscore any answers to the essay questions around nonlinear positioning or new forms of art, something like this, it's going to be involved with this question. Now, remember last week I asked the question a la Turing, can machines think? That's the question, can machines think? It's an interesting question, not because we might be very close to that ability to see machines actually coming up with some form of thinking, including thinking, but because it puts into question, what does it mean to be human, and what does it mean to think? And at the end of the day, or at the end of this course anyway, that's what's being problematized or even traumatized. What does it mean to be human? And what can this humanity become? Who are we? Now, that's not an idle question. It's not even meant as a romantic question. It's really asking one to come up with a way in which one understands the complexity of identity. And you know that we did the A equals A as a form of identity thinking that Heidegger rejects. Now I'm just putting these on the table just so you can get a sense of the different ways in which I'm going to try and do a little knitting moment and knit these together. But we also know that Heidegger states in his Identity and Difference that identity has to have some sense of belonging and has to also include some sense of being alone, the solitaire scenario, solitude situation. And that also has something to do with distance. and something to do with systems, but the systems themselves are not rational and they're not irrational. And that's what I want to get into today. I want to try and really clarify that and see if we can really, I don't know, put it to bed in a certain sense. Okay, so the first thing to think about in the clouds and clocks, I asked you last week, what do you think, how do you think it works? Do you think that the world is made up of clouds? Do you think logic is a cloud? Or do you think logic is a clock? I remember, Nick, I think you said it was a clock.
I think we had the discussion after the meeting, didn't we?
Yeah, oh yeah, maybe that was it, yeah. What do you think? Is logic a cloud or a clock?
What kind of logic are we talking about?
This thing called logic.
Cloud has a cloud logic.
And what is a cloud logic for you? What would that mean?
Whatever the cloud was.
So a cloud sort of hangs together, but it doesn't have edges, so it's somehow cohesive. So logic implies a cohesion of some kind, but a cloud implies movement, spreading, kind of
What, a
What's that?
change?
nebulosity.
And
Yeah,
it changes.
some kind of change. Whereas a clock, what does a clock strike you as?
Predictable.
Very predictable, very ordered. Yeah, so we're okay. And so if we put clock to your right, okay, so stage right, and cloud to stage left, you know what that means, right? Stage right and stage left. Okay, it means from the point of view of the audience, what's on the right and what's on the left. That's all that means. Okay, so you're the audience, I'm the stage. So this is the right and that's the left. Okay, now, let's say the clock is here and the clouds are here, and that's your continuum. So Popper says that that is the typical way, Karl Popper, K-A-R-L, Popper, as in poppers. Karl Popper states in this very early article that you can go all the way to the right and you get this really strict sense of determinism, or you can go all the way to the left and you get this strict sense of indeterminism. So that's what I want to start with. Now, this thing that goes to all the way to the right is basically a direct result of understanding and taking on board Newtonian physics, basically. Under Newton's watchful scientific gaze, he made the argument that everything is a clock. Everything can be determined with an amazing form of preciseness. A cloud is a clock. Everything is a clock. Because when you really look at the clouds, they are in fact clocks. Do you understand that sentence? Does anybody disagree with that sentence? Okay, good. You're all Newtonian. Okay.
Disagree.
Okay, and how do you see logic then?
I think there's something that is indeterminate in that there might be aspects of that cloud movement or weather prediction that's able to be precisely predicted, but then there'll be something unpredictable can come in from nowhere.
Okay, but it would have to come in. It'd have to come in from the outside to come in.
Yeah.
Okay, so what
But
Newton?
Newton's version of that would be that the force coming from the outside that affects the clock can be predicted. The cloud can be predicted. His idea is that you've got any kind of machine, whether it be the atoms in a cloud or whatever, if you know where they start and what forces have acted on it, then you can say where it's going to go forever.
Forever.
Until
Yes.
maybe something comes from the outside and knocks on it again.
Yeah, in
But then you
fact,
can follow it, predict it.
in his argument here, Popper puts it like so. He said, Okay, according to what I may call the common sense view of things, some natural phenomena, such as the weather or the coming and going of clouds, are hard to predict. We speak of vagaries of the weather. On the other hand, we speak of clockwork, precision, if we wish to describe highly regular and predictable phenomena. So what he tries to clarify is that under Newton, all clouds are clocks, as he puts it, quote, even the most cloudy of clouds. This proposition, all clouds are clocks, may be taken as a brief formulation of what is later called in science and in writing physical determinism. I push you, you fall back. There's the law of gravity, there's all these kind of logics that come in. So the physical determinist, who says that all clouds are clocks, will also say that in fact that's how one understands social arrangements. That this notion of how Newton has come up with something is to make the argument that everything can be precisely determined. And this is incredibly important. So another way of putting this is that we arrange things not according to the nature, the essence of something. They are arranged because they follow certain laws. This sounds reasonable on the whole. Thompson's being very quiet. Now, there's another group that argue, and the most important of that group was Charles Peirce. And a lot of people might have come across his work because he was a psychologist and dealt with speech. Now, he argues that all clocks are ultimately cloudy. That ultimately there is no such thing as absolute profound levels of precision. That one cannot be as predictive to the infinite zero. And so he makes the argument, following, as it turns out, Einstein and this kind of move, that you have the situation where nothing is determinate, that it's all indeterminate. But we know that that's not quite right either, because if nothing were determinate, then you would have a form of chaos that would be the primary moving environment. So what I tried to interject into the course the last couple of times was the move that Gödel makes, G-O-D-E-L, with two umlauts, two little dots over the O, Gödel. What Gödel argues is that any determinate system always is incomplete. Now, that's profound, and you might not realize just how profound, because it doesn't sound all that profound. But what is being said here is that he's not talking about being indeterminate, he's talking about it being incomplete, and that it will never be completed. There is no completion to any system, any simple system, any complex. It doesn't complete. Now that's very radical. And we're going to circle back to this again, because I want you to start getting used to hearing these kind of expressions. What does that mean to you to think that a simple system can't be completed? Andre, what does that mean to you?
Well, it's the fallacy of the Hegelian dialectic that leaves out the dirt.
Okay, so the dirt, it's not how Tamsin was suggesting in a certain sense, that something comes from the outside and comes in.
But it's what is in the system that's being ignored, or
It's, the system itself has an incompleteness. So think of it this way, think of, you know, where's mine? Let's say this is our system. This system is complete in the sense that there's nothing outside of it that makes it other than what it is, right? It kind of is what it is, it's this thing. This is the whole system. So what I'm worried when I hear something being left out is it's not like something comes in and breaks apart this. What's happening is that even something that appears to be completely solid isn't solid. It's not that it has one part being, let's say, gray matter and the other part being, I don't know, open matter. And this is the hard part to figure out. It's a physical indeterminacy or a physical incompleteness that doesn't mean that you have complete, incomplete, complete, incomplete. You have complete and incomplete at the same time.
It's uncertain.
It's uncertain.
Yeah.
And how do you understand uncertainty there?
Well, I might understand it if I could remember it. In terms of the uncertainty principle, so there's parts of that object which are not actually within the object at a given time.
But where is it?
Out there. Well, you don't know. If you know where they are, you don't know where they're going.
Not quite. So here's what you have to just keep pulling yourself back to. Don't think about insides and outsides. There's no outside. There's no outside to the solar system. And you could say, well, you know, the Milky Way makes up one of the galaxies and there's like lots of galaxies. But at some point, there's no outside to the lots of galaxies. How far can you go with that idea? You can say that within a galaxy you can have different planets and this kind of thing, but they're not outside of the big outside. At some point, there's no outside. Can you see that? Good. That's pretty profound, if you can see that. So if you can go to the complete edge and try and look over the edge, you're not going to be able to see an edge because there is no edge. Because if there were an edge, there'd be an outside. So there's no edge. You get that? So every system has its incompleteness within itself or as part of itself, because within isn't even the right word, because even the word within then makes it seem like there's a without. You got that? This is the toughest part of this course. So another way of putting that is that when you're thinking of the famous bee, has anybody found a bee yet? Nobody's gone, nobody's forced themselves into an antique shop? Okay.
I wanted to bring yourself.
A bee,
Yes.
this kind of bee, not like this kind of bee.
Which you can eat.
Okay. Anyway,
Very traditional, in our like bread making things. It's
as long as it's
shaped
not
like
gluten.
Like a donut.
dry.
And that just really just took out the romanticism of what was going on just then. The so-called rim of this is actually not outside of it, and the so-called, you know, this bit of it, this part is not inside. If you can meditate on this at the same time. Shall we try it? Did we do meditation? We had our go at meditation. Did we? I thought it was the PhD students that did that. Was it here? So sorry. No.
Yeah, we did. We looked it up.
Yeah,
we
that was-
didn't
Yeah.
meditate on it, we just looked at it briefly.
No,
Well,
we did
what's
it in the
the
PhD. Okay, so let me explain. How many people have actually meditated other than the 3 people that sit in the PhD class? Okay, and when you meditate, Katie, what do you do?
Well, I attended a series of meditation classes with an actual Buddhist monk, but it was really difficult. So all I could really do was listen to his voice
Okay,
and just try, because he tell you to try and think of nothing, but you can't really.
right,
So then that nothing transformed in my head as just his voice. So there's nothing else other than just
right,
his
okay.
voice. Yeah.
So the thing about you've meditated, I take it,
Variably.
variably, and what has it been like? What do you do when you meditate?
Well, it's not all about nothing. Usually it's about something, and usually it's about something I don't like about myself, or something I want that I can't have, or there's a tension. It's usually about some kind of tension, and then because that's just what's there
Mhm.
around. So it's kind of just hanging out with this, and then as you hang out with it, it changes, and a lot of the time it just dissolves, and then it's just you get an emptier space.
Okay, anybody else want to give it a go before we actually give it a go? Yes?
You have to try and empty your mind.
Yes, Nick?
I think so. So,
Yeah, sorry.
carry on.
I think emptying your mind is actually very difficult, but a lot of the meditation is based on concentrating on something which isn't your thinking, like your breath, or not as in bad breath, but sort of breathing in and out, and that sort of thing, so that it's very sort of, or a mantra. So you are concentrating, but not on something that has meaning, or...
Okay, good, we're getting warmer there. Yeah, what were you gonna say?
You me?
Yeah, sorry.
Yeah, I did meditation for a lot of years, and one of the main things is the breath that takes you in. It's more that you aware of your physical presence very much, and then you become unaware of it. It's like you let go of that, and when you get to that state, then you're truly meditating. But it's really hard to do. You have to get rid of everything that's around you and everything that's in your head at the same time.
Okay, so now we're gonna try something, because what I want you to do, what we're gonna try and do with this is I want you to try and do 2 things at the same time that are paradoxical. They're not necessarily contradictory, but they're paradoxical. One is to hear, to listen, and the other is to empty your mind of everything. So everybody has to put their feet square on the ground, so no cross legs. Now, put your arms very comfortably on your lap. Sit up straight. Oh, that's tough. Sit up straight. And now, what I'm going to ask you to do is close your eyes and listen to the room. And anything you hear in listening, don't name it. You hear the voice outside, you can just say to yourself, oh, there's a voice, and bring yourself back to yourself. Concentrate on your breathing. And as soon as you start to think about your breathing, just let it go and go back to listening to the room. And if you start thinking to yourself, must do the laundry, just let it go. Mind starts to wander, bring it back to yourself, very gently. Don't name any of this here, any of the things you're hearing. Just hear it. Okay, wake up. Okay, now I do it like that because the snap puts you back into thinking. Now what we're talking about here, we meaning Carl and Albert and myself, is that when you let go of rational logic, there's another logic that starts to come into the scenario. That logic can occupy two or more things at the same time. Now, meditation isn't the only way to get there. Astrophysics is another one, where you start to learn about how indeterminacy creates an environment around which you can just be. And there's no outside to the be, and there's no inside to the be. You're just a be. Now, if you get really good at this, you can start looking at the actual be and do the same thing where you empty yourself, so you're actually seeing something that's very emptied. So we tried the meditation on sound. You can do it visually as well. You can like look at something. I find sound is more relaxing. You can really just sort of go with the flow because you can hook on. Because I think that, it's just my own little pet theory, that the voice or any kind of sound has a way of organizing or sort of gently destabilizing the scientific mind that we have. So you allow yourself to start doubling, tripling what you're hearing. Now, this is a very specific kind of logic. This logic, not so much from the meditative side of it, but from the point of view of doing this multiple scenario, is what Heidegger begins to talk about in his work called What is Called Thinking, which I asked you to take a look at. In What is Called Thinking, he says, in asking that question, there's basically four ways, four things that might come to mind when you're asked the question, what is called thinking? And the first obvious one is that the answer is that it's a logic. That's a rationality. It's something you do, something you go do. Another version of it, another way in which that question, what is called thinking, what it sort of prompts, is to ask yourselves the question, well, what does it signify? What does thinking signify? I.e., what is meaning? So in the first example I just gave about what is called thinking, one might think it's something that you go do. Tennis, thinking, cooking, thinking. In another way, thinking might just be what is that which creates meaning. In a third sense, it's something that implies that it's correct. That to think is to do something essentially right, like as in correct. It's to achieve some kind of order, and the order is good. So there's a double scenario to that. But what Heidegger says is for him the most delicate part, because all of those are actually part of this thing called thinking. But what he concentrates for the next book and all of the things is that thinking is actually what you get called upon to do. slightly different. It's not something you go off and do. It's something that gets you into a position to be open. That's why that's why we just did that little tiny version of meditation moment. So if thinking is actually that which opens you to the ability to hear or hear differently, or let's say not just hear, because he makes a big distinction between hearing and listening. If thinking is actually a way in which you learn how to listen, for Heidegger this becomes a form of attunement. So the attunement, which should click off a couple things with the Kierkegaard thing we did way back in that, but even if it doesn't, if you didn't take that course, being attuned to something is not quite the process, right? A lot of times people think thinking is a process, and a lot of people talk about it that way. But thinking is not a process. There's 2,500 years of metaphysics that calls it a process, calls it a naming, calls it an identity, a meaning. What Heidegger is trying to get at is that thinking, this fourth sort of strand, as it were, is that where you understand the be, the to be. That is to say, where you're pulled into a position of attunement. Let me just go through it again, because it's a complex point. I want to make sure you get it. So, in Karl Popper's original way of putting this, are we clouds or are we clocks? What does it mean to do logic? The answer for Popper, when you finally read this, if you read it for your essays, the answer for Popper is that we are indeterminate processes of logic, but the indeterminacy has a determinate quality. It's not so chaotic. And he starts to develop this notion with Einstein and the notion of quantum physics, and he leaves the article on Heisenberg's work. By the way, I was so lucky the other day. I ended up getting, in a charity shop, does anybody know what Los Pollos Hermanos stands for? Nobody knows because they don't watch Breaking Bad. Has anybody watched Breaking Bad?
Series 2.
So you're all in series 2.
Yeah. Is
Huh?
it? Well, hermanos means.
It's a thing called Los Pollos Hermanos. It's got 2 chickens.
Oh, yeah, the company.
Takeaway.
It's a
Yeah.
takeaway, right? It's where the meth labs are. They were selling in a charity shop the T-shirt, and I got it. I got the T-shirt. I was going to wear it today, but I forgot to bring it from London. Anyway, sorry, I mentioned that. Now, back to more serious things, or back to less serious things. That's far more serious, Breaking Bad. Now, when you think about this attunement, that's a different form of logic. And that is the form that situates, literally sits you down, situates you, so that you are both called into a position to hear or to listen, to be, quote, attuned to your surroundings. And for Heidegger, this is the first step, not the only step, not the last step, just the first step of poetics. This is a present for you, Yasmin. I'm giving you a present for your tutorials. So poetics and the poetical, in this sense, literally is talking about the way in which one can inhabit a logic that is neither rational in the scientific sense, nor irrational in some sort of psychological sense, but actually puts one in a position to be attuned. There's a logic to the ability to get into that position. Now, before I open up to the scary part of where this is leading, tell me what you're hearing. What have you just heard? Andre, I'm gonna pick on you. Would you want to pick up there in class?
What do you want to hear? Sorry?
I want to know what it is you're getting out of this. What's happening today, and what's happening for the last 2 lectures really, or maybe the last 3, is there's a breaking of bad metaphysics, let's say. I'd even be saying metaphysics, but I've become calmer about that word. There's a breaking out of, or breaking away from, or breaking of metaphysics in terms of a logic. Normally, people think art is one form of logic, science another. But here we have on the table, the first thing you need to grasp about untimely meditations is the ability to have a way of thinking, a way of logic that is an indeterminate or uncertain, as Simon brought up, uncertainty that allows one to be attuned. Now, Heisenberg, especially for those of you that are watching Breaking Bad, know that Heisenberg, what was the big thing that Heisenberg invented which is not math? Does anybody know? What's that?
Atomic bomb.
Yes, and how did he come up with that? What, it's 2 words, or maybe 3, the first one being the.
Splitting the atom.
Not uncertainty, the close, the something principle. What? No? Tasman was closest yet furthest apart, furthest away. The something principle.
Certainty.
Yes, the certainty principle. Thank you, Dad. Yes. Now, the certainty principle, so this is why I want to take this very slowly. I want you to hear what's being said. When something is certain, that doesn't mean it's fixed. That is to say, static. The great thing about the certainty principle is that it proved that predictability could happen in indeterminate structures. That's wild for those of you that follow that side of it. So there's an indeterminacy that can create certainty, and that certainty is a feature of the ability to be indeterminate. Now that position forms the basis of liberalism, that says that a society that has freedom of speech, and therefore everyone can speak, everyone can have the ability to come up with their, quote, own opinion, that is to say, create an uncertain or indeterminate space, will always create stability, will always create a certainty. That's the basis of the democratic principle. Sadly, it was also the basis of the atomic bomb. All right, good news, bad news, same news. So you've got to understand how certainty is a radical position. It's a modern position. It is not part of any fundamentalist religion, whether that religion is Jewish fundamentalism, Christian fundamentalism, Protestant, Muslim, whatever. Any of the fundamentalist religions will not have certainty in this that's linked to indeterminacy. See, when you, let's do it again. So there's the type of determination or determinacy that Newton talks about. It's a linear logic. It's based on Euclidean geometry and a lot of other forms of geometry. This logic becomes the name of science. It's what people in a lay sense today understand. So you guys, maybe myself, understand as science, in the sense that there's something certain about it. There's something determinate about it. And that's why it's science. And that is actually scientism. It's not science. Science is based on a much more of a crazy, flexible scenario. In fact, you might want to go as far as to say, as did Heisenberg, that science, real science, is based on indeterminate structures. And indeterminate structures create certainty. Why are you laughing? Because you're becoming a philosopher and you find...
I'm laughing talking about where science comes from. I've just been reading about the actual word origins, and it comes from the Proto-Indo-European word for shit. So etymologically, science means shit. So I'm just
That's
chuckling
hilarious.
to myself about that.
Actually, it doesn't come from that. It comes from the Latin word, scientia. Well,
Which comes from the word to know, which comes from the Proto-Indo-European word separate to distinguish, which is the original word which mentioned.
which in what is the thing that Freud says is the main gift that you give your parents? Shit. It's the first gift. Because you have nothing to give, because the argument, you didn't take the other course, but the argument that Freud gives, I mean, Freud has a lot of issues that are annoying, but this one's actually quite good, which is that as a child, you know, things are going really well for you. You're born, you have the breast, it's wonderful, you're growing, you're enjoying yourself, you know, and at some moment it's taken away. And from the point of view of the child, that's like, why? What did I do? You know? Now, it's true that you might be a lot bigger than you were because you might be growing. Your mother or the bottle, who's ever giving you this thing that resembles the breast, is thinking you don't need to be on this any longer. But the child interprets this as they've done something wrong, and they take it as a problem. And that's called the oral phase. And for those of you that keep putting things in your mouth, you haven't gotten through the oral phase yet. Okay, so that's now, the next thing that happens is that when you are first born, and, you know, we've got a couple people who are gonna be new parents, and they're gonna see their child shit for the first time, and that's gonna be just wonderful. You're just gonna go, wow, that's so fabulous. It wears off after a while, the wonders of that. And at some point, the child has to be toilet trained. So the child, when the breast is removed, the first gift that a child can give its parents that is of itself is shit. It's the only thing that is separated from the body that it can tangibly give. And what Freud argues is that's the basis of the artist. Artists are continually giving people their shit, you know, and love their shit, think their shit is fantastic, you know, and whatever. It's like very traditional stuff. Okay, so you're right in that sense, but it's a form of knowledge. Or a proper way of thinking, or a better way of thinking about this, not proper, but a better way of thinking about it is that shit and knowledge go together, right? And they don't just go together like on the one hand shit, on the other hand knowledge. They go together as in together. And that's what we're trying to get at here. So for Heisenberg and the certainty principle, there's the next step, which is what Gödel tries to talk about, this notion of incompleteness. Incompleteness, don't mix them up. Incompleteness is not the same as indeterminacy. Incompleteness means that there cannot be a closure, ever. And as a result, it means that it's not certainty that is the primary mover, it's uncertainty. But again, be very careful when you hear those terms, because in fundamentalist thinking, in fundamentalist religions, certainty is dogma. That's what certainty means. Certainty is the law, and the law is the dogma. In modern environment, modern sciences, including actually I just found out that man is Sanskrit for knowledge. I had no idea. Anyway, the old Sanskrit people, I just pulled them in when you did that language no one actually reads anymore. Anyway, when, I got on a tangent now. What was I saying? Now,
Incompleteness isn't the same as
thank you. Thank you very much. Yes, so when incompleteness is put on the table as something to understand, in the modern sense, no, that's not what's in here, I'll say it again. So, in fundamentalism, which is with us still today as we know, but predates modernity, the notion of certainty and dogma are the same thing. So to be certain is to be dogmatic. And God was the main thing that was always certain. It's very crucial. Modernity moves the way of thinking about certainty as probability. As things can make an order out of chaos. It's very much a trope of the Enlightenment, everything. And when you think about it, it's kind of it's kind of a nice thing to know. I mean, if everything is like horrible and a disaster, and you're walking around and, you know, people are getting assaulted, and the sun, it's just a horrific environment, then it's kind of nice to make order out of chaos, so that not every 5 minutes you're running into something horrible. You have some kind of way of thinking it through. So modernity that created the notion of certainty as embodying change, but change that had some sort of like positive outcome. Like the probability of the sun going up and the sun going down, the sun going up and the sun going down, basically on a regular basis, would be pretty freaky if suddenly the sun started going all around the houses. It'd be pretty weird if suddenly, like is happening with environmental changes, summer started happening in March. Things like that. I mean, it's really important that you see how critical the word certainty was and remains. But what Einstein's work led to, and what one might say Gödel and Turing's work led to, was moving away from certainty, which is already a major milestone, and moving into uncertainty. And the word uncertainty, again, takes on these weird outfits, these weird fashions. If you're uncertain as a kid, if you live in an uncertain environment, usually that means it's frightening. If things are uncertain, normally you're feeling not so good. It's kind of nice to have things that are a little bit more, let's say, regularized. So uncertainty doesn't necessarily imply freedom. So remember that when uncertainty is being used here, it is precisely talking about a radical indeterminacy, which is to say a very specific kind of freedom. And that's very important that you get this next bit. So just to keep hammering it home, I'm going to put it in a linear fashion because it's easier to hear that way, but of course time doesn't go in this linear fashion. So linear, step number one, fundamentalist religions, slavery, feudalism. I'm going to sound like a hardcore Marxist here, which I'm not. So, you have the feudalism, and then, at 4:30 on a Tuesday afternoon, it turns into capitalism, and then it goes into post-capitalism, and so on. You know that's not how it goes. But the rise of the Enlightenment from Kant, the supposing it could be otherwise, this way in which one thought about how change could happen within a system, was critical, and Hegel was critical for this, Newton was critical for this, even Leibniz and his portal monads, critical for this, all critical. And now what happens is that you get to this next bit, and the next bit is where quanta starts coming into the picture. Remember that quantum physics, in this case, quote, simply, unquote, means bundles of light. So think of yourselves as all being Thor, the god of thunder or something, or who throws the lightning bolts? Is it Thor? Zeus throws the lightning bolts. Well done. We've missed you. Thor is the thunder, right? Good. Okay, so we have the lightning bolts being thrown by Zeus. So think of yourselves as Zeus. Okay. Or in fact, think of yourself as a lightning bolt. Even better. Think of this bundle. How do you bundle it in your head? How do you bundle a bundle? How does that bundle happen? Okay, that's what we're talking about. We're getting to a weird area. So the first thing to think about is the way in which certainty and dogma feature, and the way in which the words certainty, dogma, and law in fundamentalist thinking, where there's a right way and a wrong way. my way or the highway. It's a fundamentalist position. There are friends and there are enemies. It's a binary. There's science and there is art. There's truth and there is lies. And it's very straightforward. And on some level, we still rely on that. I mean, it'd be kind of crazy. How, you know, if someone was causing harm to you or your family, you'd really want there to be the truth being told, and that truth being, you know, not just someone's opinion, but that it was actually true. So this is how, what's the best way to put this is how sort of murky the truth gets. On the one hand, there's no such thing as truth, and that's the truth. On the other hand, there is no such thing as truth, and that's the truth. So you have these two forms of truth right away. So in the first case, you have certainty, dogma, closed systems. In the second case of modernity, with the Enlightenment, you have certainty, which means movement and change. It doesn't mean dogma, it means a way in which the individual begins to take command of his or her thinking, and thinking because something that you can do. And in the latter stages, it becomes uncertain, not in the sense of being scary, although it is scary. But its primary feature is not that it's scary, its primary feature is that it is uncertain. And this uncertainty principle, is what is at the basis of what is called morphogenesis. M-O-R-P-H-O, genesis, morphogenesis. And morphogenesis literally means the changing of the genome structure in such a way that the change comes about via the uncertainty, not the certainty. And it's been around for quite a long time, though Mandelbrot sort of pushed it along the furthest. Now, this gets us to the position of Turing and to the original, the variety of different ways in which Turing asked the question, can machines think? And last week, I think that we got into a bit of a discussion where the argument was, or it was suggested that Turing doesn't think machines can think, and that was inaccurate. I want to make sure that you know this. So, if we know that there are 4 types of thinking, minimally speaking, what does that mean for a machine? Can a machine think?
It could do the first one.
Which was?
The logic, rationality.
Okay, so it can do determinism. Yeah, you know that. But that's not really thinking. That's really what became programming. You can program something. In fact, people argue that dogmatism is a form of programming. If someone's dogmatic, they are programmed, and it's seen as this kind of robotic position. So, what would it mean for a machine to think? According to Turing, what it means is that a machine can understand the nuances of a question. That's what it means to think. That there are nuances, and that the answer to the question is not ready to hand. To put it slightly differently, or the way in which Turing actually puts it, is that thinking allows an expression of a method that may or may not be programmed within the existing machinery. Now he writes, let me see if I can find this, so yeah, no, he go in his work, not on the, which is in the Dropbox, so I was glad to see that. In his piece called Intelligent Machinery, a heretical theory, he often says, you know, look, machines can't think because they can't, and then he goes on to explain how they can. And he says it a lot, so when you're reading, read the whole article. Don't just read the first couple of lines. That's what I was worried about when I heard the last thing that was going on. So he says here, quote, this is on page 5 something. It's on page 472. My contention is that machines can be constructed which will simulate the behavior of the human mind very closely.
Siri not available. Connect to the internet.
See what I mean? That was perfect timing. They will make mistakes at times, and at times they may make new and very interesting statements, and on the whole, the output of them will be worth attention to the same sort of extent as the output of a human mind. The content of this statement lies in the greater frequency expected for the true statements, and it cannot, I think, be given an exact statement. It would not, for instance, be sufficient to say simply that the machine will make any true statement sooner or later. For example, of such a machine would be one that makes all possible statements sooner or later. That's not what he's calling thinking. We know how to construct these, and they would probably produce true and full statements about equally frequently. Their verdicts would be quite worthless. But he says, let us go rather more carefully into the nature of this proof. And in this, he tries to show how something can learn. So the word thinking moves off of this so-called deterministic logic and starts to embed itself into the moment of learning. Now, what's interesting about this article, I mean, you know, he's writing it in the 50s. This is way before the internet. It's way before anything that we see, and we have, we normally have it now as a computer. And how many people? Well, we were talking about this today in the earlier tutorial, but for those people that were listening to BBC 4 this morning, it's quite sad. 3 or 4, revealing myself. Did you take on board did you get a chance to take a look at what they were saying about the radio waves? Did anybody hear this?
I missed that.
Nobody listens to Radio 4. Great, good. Do you people, that sounds terribly harsh. Do you wonderful students have any relationship to media at all? Okay.
Is this where they're reporting Big Bang echoes?
This morning. And what exactly, do you remember what this was? I'm glad you came back and joined
Well, I
us.
didn't hear it this morning. I heard it last night. The sense of it is that some American researchers have detected echoes of the
No,
the Big Bang, in so much as if the theorists were right, you should find distortion of light waves created at fractions of a second, moments after the Big Bang, and they think they discovered those deviations of light waves. So at the moment you can't actually measure gravitational waves, but they think they've found the effects of gravitational waves.
And why is that important?
Well,
why do they think that's the sign of life?
Expansion.
And why is that, yes, and so why did that make life happen?
Well, it did go faster than the speed of light, which is interesting.
Yes? And why is it that things can't, I mean, I feel like, God, why is it that things can't go faster than the speed of light? What is this thing about the speed of light?
Well, because Einstein said so, basically.
That's not really an argument now.
Well, no, I mean, things can go faster than the speed of light, or they don't have the theory to explain it, but this is...
And if they go faster than the speed of light, what happens?
Oh, what happens to things going faster than the speed of light? Something to do with gravity, isn't it? You become infinitely heavy or
and then what?
infinitely light or something.
Black hole.
Black hole,
Oh,
yeah.
black hole,
It's
right.
like when they tried to prove the...
That's right. When in doubt, black hole.
That's when they did the Higgs boson experiment. They didn't know whether they were just going to blow up the whole world. It was quite a risk. It was an enormous risk. I thought that was kind of crazy.
Yeah, was
That
it
was
was
the
crazy.
BBC that didn't know if they were going to blow up the world. They were quite happy that they weren't.
That's right.
Well, they took that risk. Yeah.
It's not really a risk if you're going to destroy everything because there's no consequences.
There's no worse.
There's no consequences if everything's been just.
Well, there is a consequence, but there's no consequence after that consequence. You know, there's no moment two after the moment one.
It's sort of one of those things, there's not much point worrying about it, because if it were to happen, that's the end of the worry, really, isn't it?
The sanguine speaks. Yes, so where does that leave us on this question? Because on this question of movement, linearity, I'm hoping that you're beginning to see how to make logics happen in an entangled way. New word. Entangled way. Entanglement. Entanglement is a very specific term, along with diffraction. These are the two kind of key terms that Karen Barad speaks about. When something is entangled, it is that the elements are distinguishable, but they can't be separated. And it's not that they can't be separated physically, but let's say theoretically they could be separated. They can't be separated in any way. And they certainly can't be separated via via a logic of thinking. So where we're going, so you get the sense of the trajectory. I know I'm presenting this in a linear fashion, but seeing that there's really no other way at the moment. The question becomes, how does one inhabit a deterritorialized rationality? Or, what is deterritorialized? I mean, Nick, you just gave a very interesting presentation on land and art, land art, and so on. And it obviously had to do with territory and literally land, okay? Like territory, the literal thing. In what way does territory become the signature for logic? Or maybe that's too hard a way of asking the question. Let's back up a little bit. If the logic that creates certainty can provide a kind of order out of chaos, what's required of that logic in order for that to happen? It starts with G. Ground. And why does it require a ground?
Because it's nailed down onto the ground.
And how does that operate in terms of the logic? Why would a logic require a grounding or a ground if it's to be certain?
Because it's closed.
Close. Sarah?
Yeah, something has to come around to confirm it's there.
Yes, and why does something have to come around to confirm it? What's this coming around
It's a
it?
base, something.
Yes, good.
It's the groundless ground, isn't it? It's got to go round, back.
Well, the telos, telos, which means the logic of how something has a goal, and the goal becomes its purpose, and the purpose becomes the reason for being, i.e. the ground. Have you never felt grounded? If I said to you, do you feel grounded? There's a lot of people in the school would say no, do not feel grounded. And by that is meant unhappy, lost, depressed, not in yourself, as it were. This notion of being grounded is a very specific sense. It's a kind of pulling oneself in. That's the notion of the ground. So the ground, the notion of the ground, in a common sense way, literally means to give some kind of presence so you can move forward in a, not in a logical manner, meaning determinist manner, but in a logical manner that allows for creativity and change. If you feel that you are able to be grounded in some way that can move you forward in an open and creative way, you are a modern. If that movement does not in any respect require a ground, you are probably not human. but you're moving toward the indeterminate identity of being. And that indeterminate identity of being is a robot. They're much better and will be much better at thinking than any of us in the room. I can tell you that when I went to Cambridge, one of the things that irritated me the most was that because I came from a very bizarre background. One part of my family was very wealthy, and the other part of my family really wasn't. And that's the family we lived in. We lived in the not wealthy family, so it was kind of so you really see on the horizon interesting things happening. But the thing that I kept to myself that I thought was fantastic was the fact that I knew how to duck and dive, and I knew how things worked. And when I went to Cambridge, the thing that irritated me the most was that these people, who more or less 99% of the people that went to Cambridge, were thoroughbred. We sat on thoroughbred grass, we watched thoroughbred crew, we saw thoroughbred cattle, and it just drove me nuts. But the thing that drove me the most nuts is that they could slum it better than anybody I ever saw slum it. They could duck and dive in ways that I had not even thought of, and it just infuriated me. And the reason I mention that is because if there's a logic, and it can be grasped, you can be darn sure that people that are actually thinking in this way that we're talking about can do it. It's a logic. I've never seen as many fantastically left-wing people who then, like a memory, blessed with memory, go back into being their normal selves later on. Now, what if the basis of being is indeterminate, determinacy, is incomplete in this, I'm going to use the P word now, postmodernist sense. By postmodern, what is meant here is that which is creating a position different from modernity, but allows for modernity to emerge. That's the key about postmodernism that a lot of people miss. And that's why Lyotard annoyingly would say postmodernism is really not about being post-modern, it's being postmodern, which means that it creates the groundless ground for modernity to come. Because you know something? This thing about being able to think and to have freedom of expression and to be able to create hasn't happened yet, goes the argument. That what modernity actually brought was alienation, was reification, was disaster after disaster, self-blame for not making it. This is what modernity actually brought. So modernity hasn't really happened yet. So the postmodern argument is that get rid of the grounds, understand how a cohesion creates the ability to be incomplete or indeterminate, or in this case, uncertain. That's the, let's say, the kind of literary way of putting it. But there's a science that matches it, that matches literally that position. And that science falls into astrophysics, or falls, however you want to say it. It's a science that deals with different forms of dimension, deals with different forms of time beyond the linear time. And I feel like I'm giving you a heartfelt speech. How are you hearing this? Are you hearing this? And would you like a break? Are you dying? You look very, very tired out of the group. Yes?
What does cohesion
Right. What does cohesion mean? Stick. Stick. Mm-hmm.
together?
Yeah. And why is that important?
It's about relating.
Yes. Okay. Now again, we're going to circle back again. I'm going to try a different way because I'm bored with myself talking. I want to make sure that you've heard it. Tell me how incompleteness comes into your work. Tell me how the parallel notions of time matter. Because if you're not connecting it to what your practice is, you're just gonna go apply it at best. And it's gonna be shit, and not in a good sense. So, how does that? Or to ask it slightly differently, let's do something that you're more familiar with. How does a modern vision infect and affect your work? Modern vision, a modern logic, the logic of certainty. How does that have something to do with your work? Can you think about it? Do you have any idea? Okay, we're gonna try it even further back. Try fundamentalism. As fundamentalist here, how would that affect or infect your work? If you took a fundamentalist position around your work, around logic. If the way in which you thought was that there was a right way and a wrong way, how would that affect your work?
And there would be no unpredictability, that it would just be very rigid, really.
Well, in a positive sense, how would that be important for your work? How would,
And then you put a message across, you could be very...
well, if you were being really precise and really specific, what is a good side of that?
Well, then you can put like a feminist point of view, you could put something quite stridently, you could show something.
Okay, I'm gonna try it again, which is, you have to know the tools of your trade. That's what I mean. So if you're using a paint and the paint doesn't go this way, but it goes that way, and you don't know that, it's gonna be terrible. Or anyway, you're not gonna be able to repeat whatever it is you came up with. And part of the thing about your work is that you have to be able to repeat it.
So it would be very crafted.
You have to know the tools of your trade. What's the tools of your trade?
Textile.
What's the tools of the textile?
Oh, a needle or thread.
And what do you need to know? Because I picked up needle and thread, and I can assure you that it's not gonna look like your work.
Oh, you have to know how to smooth it so it doesn't wrinkle and so it doesn't slither across what you're sewing it onto.
Uh-huh.
So you don't go cricky.
Yeah.
So you don't knock the thread up each time, it doesn't tangle up.
Okay, so you have to be some kind of precise. What about your work? What do you need to know? What's the skill that you need to know to do your work?
I have to know how light works, I think.
And how does it work? Because you do know this in your work, it's true.
Well, there's a logical system to it.
Uh-huh, and what is that logical system?
That you join up the negative and the positives, and you join them to a sensor or a computer or something that tells it what to do, basically, and then you give it instructions by the computer.
And that you need to know how to do that.
Yeah.
And if you don't know how to do that, what would happen?
Well, then it wouldn't work.
Okay, let's talk about this piece here, the little finger. Finger weight.
That one's simple.
Mhm.
That's just, that doesn't even have a sensor, it's just plugged in.
And what did you need to know in order to make that work?
I needed to know that that material was waterproof, that I could... Actually, I had to do quite a lot of experiments to embed the electricity into it, because I had to make the join waterproof, which is quite difficult to do, because I had to know that it's set inside the hand.
Okay. And what about the actual making of the hand? What did you need to know for that hand? Would you consider that a piece of art?
Yeah.
Okay. So, as a piece of art, there's something about it that is sensuous, that, that, quote, works, right? It's not like, I can assure you, if I tried to make that hand, it probably wouldn't look like that. Probably look pretty bad. Probably look like this. So there's a skill involved. You guys have a skill. I have a little bit of a skill, but not as much. There's a skill in making these things that you see lying around. Some of them are very good, some of them are less good. But there's a skill involved. And you need to know your skill. You need to step up to the plate You have to be good at it. If you're not good at it, that's it, forget it. But if you simply use that as your logic, what would happen? If you simply use skill,
Then it wouldn't, then it would be
then it would be
craft.
craft. Now,
Yeah.
don't get upset for anybody that likes craft, but the argument about that is precisely that. We have now just opened up the big can of worms between the argument between arts versus crafts. Because art takes that skill and blows it up, or changes it, or mutates it, or does something with it. But if you don't have the skill, you ain't gonna go very far. There's some people who will make the argument that if you can't draw, like literally draw, represent things, then you're not gonna be able to do abstract art. I don't have that view, but I'm just saying, a lot of people do that. The view I have about logic, for example, is my view, is that if you can't understand how things go from point A to B, then you're never gonna understand how things go from dimension A to dimension Q. It is just not gonna happen, because you're gonna use an old technology to try and understand a new one. So you have to be good at what you can be good at, so that you at least know what that is. So now we're gonna try it again. So Katie, what's your skill set? What do you know? What do you have as a skill?
I can make ordinary things into something most people don't think of making it into.
But what literally is the skill?
What is literally the skill?
Are you painting? Is it sculpture? Is it poetry? I mean,
Then at the moment it's craft and it's crochet. Yeah.
but crochet doesn't necessarily mean it's craft. Actually, do you
No.
know Christine Wertheim? Wertheim. She's gonna come here, by the way, in May, end of May. In fact, actually, I just got an email from her saying she was coming here. She had been invited by CFAR to come here and give a talk. I was like, really? I'm CFAR, I haven't heard of it. That's kind of interesting. Anyway, so she obviously doesn't mean that. I'm waiting for a clarification on what she means. But she uses she uses crochet in all of her work.
Yeah.
And it's very quite interesting looking work. Anyway, but you would have, just like Tamsin, you need to know how to do that, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because you can't just think, oh, I'm gonna make this beautiful crochet and then it's not gonna, Nick, you're like mad things that you put your movable sculptures on the land. You have to have a sense of how they actually stick together, right?
Yes, I went on a basket making with willow course.
I have to say, they were quite well done, the little basket weaving stuff that you did. And it has to work. I mean, if it doesn't work, so on some level, all of you have, including myself, all of us have a sense of how the materiality of something interacts with the space. That's why you had to put the words on the wall. You had to see, you had to literally check it out. And you had to hone it and hone it and hone it. Okay, so that's one step. Now that is the form of, let's say, learning how it is correct. Now there might be many ways into learning how that is correct, although if you're a certain kind of crafts person, you're gonna think, no, there's only one way and it's my way, that kind of, like a lot of times you go to the apprentice, you become the apprentice and you are at the feet of the master. And like I said, I have for those of you that are gonna suffer under my PhD leadership, I can tell you that I expect the best. That's all. You'll do it. You'll be fine. You'll be fine. All of you will be fine. Why? But the best means that you need to know certain logics. You need to know them as though they were the things you were really interested in. You just need to know them to start with, because that's just the start. So having said that, one part of this knowledge, of this thinking, is literally, what is it signifying? Well, it's signifying a craft, it's signifying a skill. That has to be as a given. Nobody is questioning that. Nobody's saying you shouldn't have any skill. You have to have a skill or you don't belong here. This is not, I'm not one of these people that believes everybody's an artist. you're an artist if you can actually do the stuff. I'm very hard-nosed about this. I think everyone can think, but they just don't do it for whatever reasons. That's not a real issue. Okay, now having said that, what's being put on the table here for you to consider is that the logic that goes into making your work requires, on the one hand, your skill, and on the other hand, something else that fires it off, that makes it go, that makes it soar, that makes it change in from, you know, the common to, from the ordinary to the extraordinary. You gotta learn how to name that. You don't have to say, oh yes, I can see how that operates. I can see how that goes. You don't have to name it in that sense, but you have to know that that's what you're doing in order to call it to yourself when you want it, and not when you're sort of walking in the desert thinking, hopefully I'll have divine inspiration at some point. Boom, it finally comes to you. You need to be able to call it to you. Now to do that, it means you have to be aware of the logic that goes into your work. And all I'm saying is that the logic that goes into your work is not the rationalistic, scientistic logic. And by the way, the rational scientific logic that goes into science also closes down thinking. It always closes down thinking, because that's not thinking. That's what unfortunately is being called science today, but that's not necessarily science. It's like, you know, Samantha's saying, shit. You need to understand the positive side of that. Okay, now we get that part. So we know that at the moment, I'm assuming that everybody in this room is minimally a modernist, by which I mean you have a technical skill that you know how to deal with somehow. You have a logic in your mind that allows you to ask the question either overtly or covertly, supposing it could be otherwise. What would that otherwise look like? That makes you a modernist. Supposing I just supposing I just press this button here, beep, what happened? Bang. Supposing it to be other. That is the way in which you follow certainty. Certainty has a logic. It doesn't necessarily have the answer. It might have a whole set of answers. It has a logic. It's a map. The map, you may not have the place settings on the map yet, but it's a map. It's a journey of some kind. And that's not what's being taught in this particular part of the course. It's not about the journey. I mean, I almost felt like making an American joke. It's about the winning. Sorry. I'm better now. I called myself. I'm going to New York, as you know. I'm turning into a New Yorker now, before your very eyes. Now, but it's neither about the winning, nor about the journey. It's about something else altogether. It's about, I guess, the cohesion. Because and the way in which things cohere differently. They cohere by the way in which they are attuned. So they have a different form of materiality. That's what's being addressed in this part of the course. That materiality requires you to understand how incompleteness and indeterminacy and uncertainty is at the core of any system. And therefore, it's at the core of law, it's at the core of art, it's at the core of whatever it is you're working on. Now, if that's true, what's the advantage of saying that? Why should that, I've now spent an hour and a half banging on about this.
If there can't ever be a closure, that means there's an openness.
Right, but if there's an openness, so what's so good about it being an openness?
It's not totalised.
And what's so good about it not being totalized?
Well, as soon as you start totalising, you close down. There's that rationality that closes out thinking. You close down any possibility of otherwiseness.
Okay.
If it was closed, you wouldn't need to think. The
Yes.
openness gives you a reason to think.
But if it were closed, a lot more things could get done. Always remember in political moves, the very first political move is to create a closed field so that friend and enemy can be set up. That is the first rule of political science. modern political science, and even pre-modern, because this is Machiavelli that develops this in the 1400s when he writes in the modern Prince, or sorry, in the Prince, he writes, the first sentence is, this book is dedicated to those not in the know. Because for those not in the know, they don't know that the first law of any political struggle is to create leaders and led, friends and enemies, to create a closed field and bifurcate it. Because that way of dealing with the cultural, the social, works. Especially if you're on the leader side, as opposed to the led. Now, the reason I raise that is because you're right, Tamsin, the openness is what one wants to go for, but only if you're unhappy with the closed. There's a lot of folks that are not unhappy with the closed and are willing to fight to the death to have it closed. Because it gives a certain kind of predictability, a certain kind of knowledge, and that goes also for art. There's fights within the art world. That was the uniqueness about conceptual art, but it kind of went crazy on some level. It became, everything was so conceptual, you couldn't, you know, I say this very respectfully, but there was a lot of problems with the art versus language, or the art and language groups and so on and so forth. But at least it moved away from representation, which is what your work was about today. It's moving away from how something gets named and claiming that not nameable something as art. Very different. You need to know which group do you want to be part of. You're going to be part of one of them. You want to be part of modern group, postmodern group, I don't know, quantum group, fundamentalist group, classical group, which one? All of them? Something else? If you want to be part of all of them, then you're a postmodernist. So it's just getting you to think in technicolor, which is very difficult. Getting you to think in technospace, technodimension. Now that we, I think, have the notion of modernity running down, who else could say that their work is dealing with something that's Emma, what about your work? You just did your whole smell thing. Would you consider the method that you're using? What is the method you're using? What would you say?
I don't know if I have a method.
Well, here are your choices. Fundamentalist, modern, discursive.
Probably modern.
Okay, and why do you say that?
Because it's experimental. It's testing things, trying things, like knowing what they do, but
Going to kill myself. Don't say that. Say that. Okay, let's try it again. Okay, yes, I think it is modern. I think you're right about that, but it's not because it's experimental. Okay, I mean, unless you mean by experimental that it's not yet figured out what the answer is.
yeah.
Okay, but that leaves you with, let's say, modern and postmodern. Okay, so it's still pretty wide. Let's try it again. Okay, so here's the first thing to learn about this. Everyone has a method. I want you to be awake to what your method is. The method is is the thing that gives you your way of proceeding. So for example, I thought it was very interesting what you did in the tutorial today with all your little smells. And I have to say, as soon as you mentioned that one of them was the armpit of some guy, I decided, I don't know if I really want to smell that particular thing. I'm thinking, which one did I smell? I've never done that one. Yeah, just turned off by it. But only because I just thought, you know, honestly, do I have to smell shit? Like, the job, the pay scale. You know, it's like, but I thought it was very clever that you had in these jars your thing. Now, what made you think to do that?
I didn't want them to be labeled to what they were, I guess. And I wanted them.
But you did put them in jars,
Yeah.
and you not just any jar.
Well, yeah. That was the last minute thing. They wanted
Okay,
it to
but
be
it
a
still
nice
worked,
one.
right? You had 4 jars that were the same,
Yeah.
and you had 2 jars They were like pills.
Yeah.
You know, hopefully you found your pills and you can put them back in, you know, but, okay. Now, maybe they're just laying to hand, so that's what you use, that's sad to know. And the things you put the smells onto was some form of cotton.
Yeah, it's kind of how they test smells of perfumes. They tend to put it on cotton
Mm-hmm.
and then test the smell on its own, and then they can mix them together. on top
Okay,
of
so
it.
how did you know to do it that way? Or what made you think that doing it that way would work as opposed to doing it any other way, like having it, I don't know, on a card and where you did scratch and sniff? Why did you think that that arrangement would work?
Made it more personal.
Okay, so what's behind this is you're bringing in an individual relationship to each thing. So part of your argument is that the individual, A, exists, B, is central, and C, is going to somehow be part of your art project, unbeknownst to the people involved. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that was pretty tricky on your part, actually. And that is very much modernist, what you're doing. Can you see how that operates?
Yeah.
Really?
Yes.
Okay, I don't believe you. Okay. Sophie, what about yours? What type of method do you think you're using?
I think I'm using a trisomatic method.
Yes, that's right. And how does that operate? How is that different from what Emma's doing? Emma's really using a modernist approach.
Because I tend to use all different strands from all different places and put them together.
And the strands you're using are color.
Colour, light, movement, sound.
So to put it slightly differently, when you're putting your let's say in this case the video together, some of those together shots are together because the tropes are linked not because of a narrative story, but because the colors,
Yeah.
or the hand, or there's some sort of so the sporing happens with, you know, maybe there's 3 types of light, and the light is what links them together, and then that is like it sort of just goes off into some other area.
Or the movement. You know, actually, when we talked about my film yesterday, and you said why did I put it like that? And it was just strictly, actually, I chose that image of the lines going that way, just because they were going that way, that was going that way, and then I made the child move that way, and then I flipped it and made it move that. So I'm always dealing with cross currents and movements going across each other. And
Yes.
Yeah.
And that itself is part of the logic that knits together your story, your micro stories that are going on,
Yeah.
which is about whatever it is about. So you have a story that says one thing, and then you have a whole bunch of other stories that are going on at the same time. That's a postmodernist approach. Now, the reason I say this, and the reason I want you to get, it's not because there's a lot of things going on, because in Emma's thing, there was a lot of things going on. So it's not that you have to have a lot of totally different things, or you're trying, you know, different approaches, you know, you're trying how the perfume smells this way, but the way in which you end up going on your path is informed, like literally forming you, by the way in which you're even setting up the very questions. And you're setting up questions already based on a multi-dimensional platform of time, space, duration. And if you started invoking all that into your thing, apart from the fact that you have a splitting headache, it probably wouldn't get you to what you're trying to do, which is literally raise the audience person, or whatever you want to call that person, as the object of the art. And that's tricky and clever and modernist. And you need to know that. You need to know how that works. Now, having said that, then you need to figure out how does that work with the stuff we've been looking at? I'm going to pick on everybody, so just be prepared. Okay? Andre? And what is your modern, or your method? Your method modern.
There's the answer.
Yeah.
I'd like to think that it's postmodern, discursive. However, I do recognise in some of the work that I made previously that there was a sense of reduction in it that seemed quite modernist about it.
Yes.
The new work that I'm making, I'm hoping that I could kind of stay away from being so reductive and kind of bringing in all sorts of possibilities to open up reading. I try and make work that there's possibilities for many readings, that it can't really be pinned down to just this one thing.
Good. Okay, so this is not to say that those people who are doing modernist things are bad, and those people who are doing postmodernist things are good, or the other way around, or those people that are doing old-fashioned painting, let's say, you know, with the little, I don't know, flowers and whatnot, is bad. Is to say that know what it is that you're actually doing, and then it will work for you. Now, why do you think what you're doing now, because people haven't seen your work, so why, can you explain a little bit why you think it's postmodern now? Because you're right, the other stuff was modernist.
Why do I think it's postmodern?
Or let's say discursive, we'll call it discursive, because postmodern is such a loaded term these days, why is it matter?
Well, my choice of location, so these are photographs, is a series of photographs that I'm taking. The choice of location is also quite loaded, but it's loaded in a very interesting way in that it already gives me a set that is producing so many different kind of narratives. It's not closed down to one specific reading.
So where are you taking it?
It's in the Museum Collection Centre. So they store the excess of the BMAG collection in this warehouse in a very haphazard way. So the one image that Johnny's seen, I've got a big 1950s computer, these big 4 monolithic black boxes with valves in the front of them, stored next to a ship's maidenhead in a crate. There are many other of these kind of situations in the centre. So with this image specifically, what I've played with is I've used some gold leaf and started picking out different depths of the image, or closing off certain parts of the image. The image also contains a card. It's a trope that I play with. It's a card that you use for colour correction when you reproduce your photographic images. So it's something to kind of test or check that your colour reproduction is correct. But it in itself kind of talks about this image sitting on this kind of precipice of it being, it's able to fall out of this reading, this correct reading, or its different readings.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yasmin, what do you think about your work? Do you think it's method?
In making or forming ideas. Which one? In forming ideas.
Yeah.
Normally it's something like that inspires me. In terms of something that's like music of the spheres.
Like, sorry?
Music of the spheres.
Mhm.
And I'm thinking about that in terms of actually it being music of the spheres. And then I think about it in terms of how it could be approached in terms of actually working out the mathematics of that.
Mm-hmm.
And like it really existing. And then translating that into a form such as if you used to use instruments with it, what that would form. So how you're taking something kind of a romantic thing,
Mm-hmm.
something that's like really strict data sets and kind of mathematicized, and then how that's again translated into something that resonates.
Mm-hmm.
And I
Okay.
think about, I haven't made this, but
So do you-
in my ideas, that's how it progresses.
So when you did your research, would you say your research fell into the categories of thinking through the laws of, in this case, physics and so, you know, the different, galaxies you were dealing with, plus the artists who were doing their various works? Did you think your work fell into following certain sort of positions on how they went forward and, like I was saying, the laws thing? Or did you think that you started with something and it took you on different paths? Or finally, that in order to make what you were trying to say, that you're connecting very, very unusual links, like the sound of the spheres with something of the steel rods and so on, that create then your piece. Which is it? Is it 1, 2, or 3? Door number 1, door number 2, door number 3.
I think I just kind of make connections
Okay,
between things.
but the connections are based on, people have seen her work, so help Yasmin out here.
Then I think you're rhizomatic.
I'd say lots of different things.
Okay. Does everybody think that she's rhizomatic? Millie?
I think it's more structured than that.
Yes.
I don't think it's as free as a
Yes. It's less free in that sense. It has a path, and the path is following a certain set of paradigms that you're trying to work through. So you work through this way, you work through, at the moment anyway, at least what I saw today. So given that that's the case, how would you characterize that? Sarah?
Me.
Yeah.
Character.
Would it be like fundamental, I mean, these are 3 types of models right now, having grossly caricatured all the models possible down to these terrible precipitates of, let's say, fundamentalist, modernist, or this rhizomatic modernist. Okay, can you explain it a little bit more, because I don't know.
I
No.
just know that it's not rhizomatic.
Well, I
I
think
know
she
that it's
falls
an
in
invention.
between.
It's an invention of sorts. It's looking at what's out there
Mhm.
and translating it through a particular lens of deconstructing data and images and rejoining them together. So I think that's different to a rhizomatic
Yes.
process. It's quite constructive. It has quite a construction, but it's still an invention.
Which is not to say again that it's bad or good, it's just to say that it's very important to understand what is this secret little thing that's pushing you to go in various directions. Anybody else want to say anything? We're going to take a break, guys. You look like you're so tired. I want you to take a break. I want you to come back in 5 minutes. And we're going to rethink of this method question. 5 minutes. Diet Coke for all.
You've got one in your thigh somewhere there, haven't you?
You're not
bleeding, are you?
No, I don't think so, but
just sort of around the corner or something like that.
yeah.
Are you awake? Are you alive?
Me?
Everybody.
Oh, you look like you're looking at me.
I was actually looking at Millie because she looked like she was going to pass out a picture there.
Well, when I was there.
Yes.
That's alright. It's Patrick's Day, not feeling too fresh.
Okay.
Could be anything between
I see, yes.
2.
That's what I'm thinking. My face just.
Yeah.
And I'm not wearing any makeup, so everyone's going to say to me all day, what's wrong with you? I'm so tired.
That's so
That's
funny.
me.
That's
really
funny.
right.
No, you don't look tired. You
I was
look
27
exhausted.
at the time, though, which is very
Yeah, that's accurate.
20 seconds on.
yeah.
Well, that's
No, the pub. No,
Oh,
no.
it's 5%.
It was my friends from work who did this.
in 10
Yeah,
minutes.
yeah,
I said
yeah.
friend.
Yeah.
I don't like it, but I won't anyway.
I'm not going to change anything.
I know, I was 12 and a half, but I just, I
You're
got
right
around
about the
more
modernists.
because I got
Because I
excited
really
about
think
getting to
that.
the part where I could
How would
tell
you
how
characterize your
ridiculous
work?
Tell who?
the tutorless.
That's what I'm waiting
Yeah, it really was. It was basically a big
I'll think,
fuck you.
have I got 5 minutes to think about it?
Literally.
Yes, but you would be the next one called on.
I'm sort of.
Yeah, you need to be thinking as well.
I just wish we sort of.
I know. Very
This
expensive.
isn't even my change, it's just I decided to
PhD.
Not during the Easter break.
No.
No, after we come, no, there will actually be a break. Yes.
So actually just giving them a break from Leibniz. They've got to go away and think about it.
I do think people have learned a lot though. I think that it's been helpful, the Leibniz
So,
thing.
I wouldn't know. It's
Yeah, you.
regretfully I'll be missing out on it
Yeah.
this term, but I'll be back with vengeance next term.
Is that carrying on the PhD through the Easter break?
No, when Easter break for my world means it's the only time I can work on my own work. So I have to go do that. So there will be, but it'll resume as soon as we come back from Easter break. Yeah.
And what happens next term? This Tuesday class stops, because that's just a limited 10-week thing.
Sadly, yes.
But then the Wednesday thing carries on.
The Wednesday then carries on.
Yeah. What about over the summer?
I think we did have it till the end of, till the end of May. But we might have done it to the end of June, I can't remember now. But then we stopped because then the MA people and myself would be involved in finishing up there. That's it. And also the PhDs need to have time to think on their own. So, they'll take a little break. So,
I like, here we go.
is that Diet Coke?
No, Johnny.
Yes?
This is explaining why science comes from shit. That helps. It's from the Latin first, but then the PIE predates the Latin.
Hilarious.
It's a lovely oil painting.
Well, I'd like to know where shit comes from though.
Even the paint sheet in this one.
You should start to screen the etymology onto the walls next.
Etymology, there's a word. But I mean, it does seem to suggest that shit is a Sanskrit word, or whatever which I have a feeling probably isn't. Or if it is, it doesn't mean the same thing. Sorry to be the cloud comes in. Okay, we ready? Oh no, we're missing. Where she is. So before we begin this last little leg, let me just say that the end of June is when we're going to do the Magic Conference. And the call is going to be put out hopefully by the end of this week or the beginning of next week. It's called Twice Upon a Time, Magic, Alchemy, and the Transubstantiation of the Senses. Yes. And it's called Twice Upon a Time as opposed to Once Upon a Time, because the twice, well, hopefully when we need to explain this, but just so you're clear in your own minds. The notion of once, it refers to a subjunctive move, as you probably already know, which means that you're in the past, but you're speaking as though it's either the present or the conditional future. So fairy tales are always interesting on that particular level because they're a subjunctive, they're the embodiment of subjunctive. It's a very specific sort of time, the subjunctive time. So twice upon it is like, it's an impossibility of sitting on different types of time, both in the past and in the future, as a subjunctive. Does anybody know what subjunctive means other than the way I've just described it? Has anybody ever studied languages?
Future imperfect.
Yeah. It's a future imperfect.
Yeah.
Yeah, so what would be a good example of that? Damn it.
Not damn it.
If I had,
If I were king of the forest.
oh, I'm trying to think of a,
It's not quite like that. The subjunctive is a little bit weirder because what it is, it's in the past. So let's say you're saying, I was thrown a party, and as it would happen, blah 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 ended up not saying hello. So the as it would happen expression. So it takes you to the back and to the past and then sort of forward. So it locates you with 1 foot in the past and 1 foot in the present and 1 foot in the future. As it would happen, he finally said yes. But when you're telling a story, it's like it's sort of the back that goes forward. That's the subjunctive. So a lot of what's being implied here and the kind of work that we're trying to slowly peel away is around this question of how one thinks simultaneously in different logics at the same time, it's one version, or that the logic one is thinking in is entangled or is diffracted. That's very critical here. So there is the, have I shown you, did I show you the Format brothers, the Japanese Rakugaku? Not sure I did that.
No.
Yeah,
No.
Started talking about it last week.
right, so that's what I wanted to end up on then. So to let you know that you're not alone in the craziness of this logic. In Japan, there is a kind of new form that's being dealt with of logic, and it has to do with synesthesia and the logics of simulated, in this case, simulated voice, and they're calling it Rakugaku. So you know, so I think it's spelled, well, it's usually in Japanese, but it's spelled, I think, R-O-K-U-G-A-K-U, Rakugaku. And Rakugaku is the name for a method that takes a very specific kind of synthetic logic, and it produces, in this case, a voice that never existed, but is totally familiar. And the voice, they're playing off of the notion of recorded voice. So when you hear, I don't know, the Beatles singing or something like this, you know, and you know that there was a group that was once called the Beatles, and that group sang a certain way, and that singing has a song, and then it ends. And so when you hear it, you don't think to yourself, they're really alive and they're secretly playing in my iPod. You actually think, yeah, that was a song. There's a thing called recorded, there's a thing called copy, and this copy has created this entity. But what they've created is a voice singing that never existed, that sounds like it did, which is Freddie Mercury. They have Freddie Mercury singing in Japanese, which he never sang in, singing in Japanese the Communist International. And what is interesting about it, apart from the fact that it's fantastic, what is interesting about it is that it is the first successful attempt of synthesizing a voice that sounds human, and sounds human to such a degree that it's the clone. It's not just cloning the visuals, it's cloning the voice, which is a very hard thing to clone. And not only that, it has ramifications in a whole nother plane. But in order to have that happen, you have to be able to have a different set of logics to make it happen. Now, are you ready to see this? I should have put this on. And then don't worry, I am going to ask the people who weren't yet asked, what is their method? I will not sleep until we get to the method. So these people are called, their buddies, or not close friends, but I brought them over here. They're interesting artists, they're called the Format Brothers. So if you want to look at it yourself, if you just Google my name, Professor Johnny Golding at academia.edu, it's on that, it's on my page. So, I think you'll be able to see it from here, you're just not going to be able to hear it. Okay, so, just one moment. That's the paper. The paper is on there that you can take a look at. Apologies, you actually need to hear it. Okay. Look at this. How bizarre. I'll find it now. Okay, we're almost there. Huh. Where's this big speech? I can't find it for you. No, irritating. I might not be able to show it to you. Have a look here. Try it another way. Here we go. Can you see that okay? It's 4 minutes. And they'll show you how they do what they're doing with this. Flatline. What do you make of that? Lily?
Interesting. No, I don't know. I was just trying to think about how you get the noise of a voice without using the voice, really. That's what
It's pretty, every time I see this, I've seen this now for years, and when we brought them over to London, we ended up setting up these enormous speakers at the Royal College, at the Royal Naval College in Greenwich. And it played this absolutely thundering across the campus. And people stopped dead in their tracks, because they, first of all, thought they heard Freddie Mercury, and second of all, it was the International, and it was at the Naval College, so it was all very complicated, and yet, what you've heard is completely unreal. What do you make of that, Sophie? Did you find it interesting at all?
Yeah, I find it really interesting. I don't know if it's because I know it's not Freddie Mercury. It doesn't sound exactly like Freddie Mercury to me, because he had a really distinctive voice. I think
it's the speakers. I can tell you, it does sound like him. Unfortunately, or fortunately, or whatever. It sounds a lot more like him than you would be able to tell on this. This is very distorted.
And maybe it was the kind of cyber thing, the sort of robotic person that made me think it wasn't real.
No, it wasn't. I mean, that was the whole point, to make you realize it wasn't real, and therefore, did it make you think that anything else you're looking at wasn't real?
It's quite frightening.
Yeah.
The kind of consequences of this.
Very frightening.
Really.
That's why I'm trying to get you to see how dangerous it is what we're studying. If you can see how absolutely dreadful.
I thought it was really clever the way they cut it together so that you had the blank screen and then just flashes of chaos and sort of rulers and just sort of glimpses of sort of demonic rulers almost. It's sort of like it did give that feeling of chaos, I think, very much.
And also using Freddie Mercury, it takes you out of the realm of it being, oh, it's Freddie, oh, it's fine. And
Also, it's
really
international. For those of us that rallied to this, I mean, it's kind of an interesting, just the whole machinations of it all. Andrew, what did you think about it?
I was trying to imagine that at the end of a Labour Party conference and bring out work there.
That's great.
That would be a good place for it.
Yes, you mean the Labour Party today?
What were they used to sing the Internationale?
Yeah, remind them. Anybody else have any comments on this? Can you see what would be the logic that would have been the method of this?
I think what's clever is the way they have the traditional kind of queen stamp, clap, clap, stamp, clap, clap, stamp,
Yeah.
that. So it sets up immediately, you think, oh, it's queen, and then it sort of intercuts very cleverly with sort of the imagery as well. But they keep that rhythm going all the way through, and they clap it, and
Mhm.
you know, they start it with the feet, but it's sinister as well, the sort of.
And so the logic, not so much the method, but the logic is definitely the logic of the beat. That's what's definitely pulling that all together. And every part of that thing that was put together had a beat. Either it was 4/4 or it was 3/4, you know, it went into that beat and it stayed with that beat. So that was the way in which they told the story, with the beat, not the visuals. The visuals obviously as well, but, and that's something to consider. Now, how do you think that they put one set of images together with another set, together with the, you know, the skeleton, you know? How do you think they, how do you think they chose which went with what? What was the method you think they used in order to pick out which images? Was it A, fundamental?
I'm going to say it's rhizomatic.
Yes. And in what way is that rhizomatic in whereas sometimes one might think they're using a modernist? I should have put this as the essay question.
Because they've interwoven all the strands together really cleverly.
Yes, so they're entangled.
Yeah.
Yes. And you get a full picture, it's just that you're not really sure what you're looking at. Even though they haven't hidden anything. In fact, they've revealed as much as possible. And still it's not telling you what it's
Well, they've only revealed glimpses, haven't they? They're clever at revealing. They only show very small parts.
Yeah. I'm wondering if in your work, Yasmin, it's not about gesture but about glimpse. If that has any resonance for you on that.
Now. I'm staying with gesture.
Andrew, what were you going to say? Were you going to say?
Or about what I do. Which would you like?
No, I thought you were going to say something. So
No, I was just interested in what you're going to say.
Yeah.
That it was too much to take in and process and then, you know, work into her work all in that moment. I thought that was a fairly reasonable comment.
Really? Yeah.
Is this
Yeah.
diffraction? Is it?
Mhm.
I mean, all the
Can you
different-
explain what you mean by that?
Well, it's coming at it from different sources. I mean, there's Freddie Mercury, there's Japan, there's the international. You know, there's high-tech computer stuff. You know, there are all these different sort of sources converging.
Mm-hmm. And also, I don't know if you noticed the Japanese writing on the bottom that then went into wingding, you know, and wingbat or whatever it's called, you know, which I thought was hilarious. So they just sort of threw that into, but you wouldn't necessarily know that if you didn't know that. And there was a lot of things that you wouldn't know if you didn't know, but it didn't take away or add. It just sort of was just there. But that has to do with the diffraction.
But is it sort of cunningly artificed diffraction or just a jumble?
Well, then the question really is diffraction just cunningly artificial or just
yes,
jumbled?
I'd always assumed it was sort of premeditated in some way.
Except there's no meditation, right?
No.
I mean, there's no brain to premeditate a diffraction. There's no God that's diffracting the thing, there's just the diffraction.
Well, there's the Format brothers, isn't there? I mean, they have some sort of agency.
Yes, but I'm just saying that the notion of diffraction itself doesn't require an uber
Right.
brain. Diffraction is expressing a certain kind of putting together that doesn't necessarily include, or in fact, it not only doesn't necessarily, it doesn't include anything that would be non-secular. So we're moving into a very different
I
world.
think what they do very cleverly is what they reveal and what they don't reveal. So it's like they're sort of holding back information
Mhm.
as well.
Yeah, but I always get the feeling that if they actually told you everything, still wouldn't it was still wouldn't know. And that's the incompleteness. It just, they just can't tell you, it just can't be told, doesn't get told. Sarah, you have a,
Have they done other things? I mean, what
Yeah,
else
they've
do
done
they
a lot
do?
of stuff.
They-
Yeah.
Along the same,
they've moved from that, I mean, their work is all now in terms of this rakudaku, synesthesia via the voice. A lot of people understand synesthesia via visual, or the, you know, sort of senses, but that's why I thought your thing today was interesting as well, because it was smell, there's his voice. They're really trying to figure out how these things operate using the logics of diffraction, entanglement, multiplicity, multidimensionality, nonlinear time, this kind of thing. It's all going into that. And they're not trying to apply it, they're actually just trying to be it, to do it, like in the category I was trying to say at the outset of the seminar, the Heideggerian move where he's saying, how does thinking call you? Not what do you call thinking, but how do you get called by it? How does that work? I mean, it's not like this big monster Marmite thing called thinking, going, come here, Sarah. Right? It doesn't work like that. Somehow you get called. What is it? How does that calling operate? And in a secular sense, and not in a like religious sense. How do you rise to think? How do you come to that? I mean, it's great when you read Turing, because he says, you know, I find it annoying, the question of, you know, can a machine think? You know, because, you know, yes. You know, but then you get tied up with what do we mean by thinking, and what do we mean by machine, and what do we mean, and then he goes on about that for a little bit, and then he just goes back to it, he goes, okay, here's what I mean by it. You know, a machine thinks when it can answer a question that either hasn't been asked yet, or knows the method that hasn't been invented yet.
And he says, what is the machine's history?
Mm-hmm.
Which is interesting, the idea that a machine has a history.
Yeah, but
And that it can use that logic to
Yes.
interpret the questions. So
yes, but the history, I mean, for those of you that have been in the other questions, I've seen this before, I just wrote it drawn on here. The history, in linear logic, goes like this, you know, it goes like, you know, past, present, future. That's more or less linear. But in what he's talking about, it goes as a cone. So the present is present there, and this is the future, and this is the past, and this is the elsewhere.
that's one you can fold up.
Yep.
Isn't it? Yeah.
So in the version that is being presented now, which we don't have time to do in this class, but if you wanted to do it on your dissertation sheet, the present becomes here. So you fold it like so. There you go. And we know that, so we have the future, the past, elsewhere doesn't fit into this. If you folded this, this is how you have wormholes. Then you have the present there, and the way you go from the past to the future is this gets folded and then it pops, boop, goes back out. That's Star Trek for you. But they're correct. That's what's really scary. I love science fact. This next page after science fiction. So that's a very different understanding of how the past and the future and the present. It's called cones, cone time. Okay, right. Next week is your chance to figure out what type of logic you're using, how it fits into your work, and what does it have to do with Schrodinger's cat. Because we're going to do one dimensionality, singular dimensions. Good. Okay.